This question was asked at Harvard campus. Look at American military expenditure. More than half of military expenditure in the world is by one country. And what is it scared of? Why does it spend so much? It's already a superpower. So it was the graph in 2008, 48.8% of the global military expenditure. 2009, nothing changed, same thing. The US was so much ahead of all the countries. You can see the remaining world, if you combine, it will not come to the American expenditure. The same thing continued in the next few years. This is 2010 or 11, 2010 here. 2011, that is the rest of the world and the US and the remaining countries. And the graph that is there in your own handout is 2012. My question is, why does one country alone spend so much on its military? Okay, so it all boils down to the way the Second World War shaped up. And the end of the Second World War happened with America being the superpower, because it was the only country, and it has been the only country that dropped the bomb for on any civilians. Is there any other country since then that has dropped the bomb or no? So that is it. So if you drop the bomb, you are de facto and de jure the superpower. That means obviously you are the only one left. America was nowhere close to being a superpower before that. Ironically, prior to that, the superpower status automatically went to the UK. Although it was not a superpower in military terms because of its empire. And at that time, the global currency was the pound sterling, obviously, because it was the UK. It would have been extremely improper that the country that was the superpower did not have dollar, that means its own currency, as the global reserve currency or the supreme currency of the world. So America promised Europe $13 billion. And $13 billion in the year 1945 would have been how much money? You cannot even imagine. It will be more than the GDP right now. That is the amount of money it promised, which was called Marshall Plan, to rebuild Europe. America took responsibility, fine, we are the superpowers. And the entire Second World War was fought within Europe. Europe was destroyed, and we take responsibility as a superpower to rebuild Europe. And we'll give you $13 billion. The world was shocked. Why will a superpower give this? So there was an agenda. In this, the US asked Europe, or especially Britain, to cede or surrender its currency as the global reserves currency. So the dollar automatically became the global reserves currency, and it automatically became the most prominent currency of the world, and so on. This thing went on, which is the commodity whose implications go around the world. Which one commodity decides maybe 90% of world politics today? Oil, we agree. So it was because of dollar supremacy that this war started. But you might say all that is fine. How is this connected to US spending so much in military? So let me build it up a little further. It also so happened that Israel was formed in 1948. And for some very strange reasons, the US has always supported Israel. Always. And Israel people, the Jews, believe that they fled to Jerusalem because that land was given to them by God in the Old Testament. And they believe that is their legal home. Strangely, that land falls among which countries? All the Arabs. So you have all the Muslim nations and you have a Jew nation. The rivalry and hostility will have to happen. To the extent that Israel has fought wars on 5 borders at a time. Imagine fighting a war on 5 borders and won all the wars, all the time. And America had been supporting Israel in a very big way, but only silently. That means only in the UN vote. Or by money. But the US never supported Israel in a war. In 1973, there was a war called the Yom Kippur War that happened between the Arabs and the Israelis. And America, for the first time, supported Israel directly in a war, angering the entire Arab world that also held OPEC with it. The Arab world was the sole supplier of oil outside of the US and some other countries. And they were so angry that they stopped the entire oil supply to America and Western Europe. This was called the biggest oil scarcity or oil shock the world has ever seen. It was actually not an oil shock in the sense that they stopped producing. Because if you stop producing oil, it will take you billions of years to reproduce it. It happens through fossil fuel and all of that. This was an artificial thing. Prices of oil became steep because of that. That you may read in my story later, that Hitler and price, that's a different thing. At that time, America apologized, the US apologized, and a deal was done. If all the oil trading were to be done only in dollar, we are fine, we apologize, and we'll not support Israel in a war. But we may support it because ideological support. The OPEC agreed, especially Saudi Arabia agreed. The rule was made, all of oil trading in the world will happen only in the dollars. Now, what is the advantage the country has that all of oil trading happens in dollars? Let's see that first of all. It has control over almost everything in the world then. Till today, there are only two oil exchanges in the world where oil settlements are done, oil trading settlements. One in New York, one in London. And only these two places have all the oil settlements going. And the US controls these two. Nowhere else do you have the oil price settlement actually. If India buys oil from any country, that's the exchange by which the settlement happens. Now things get funny sometimes. Saddam Hussein thought he was just too powerful, and he thought the supremacy of the dollar was a big farce. It had to end someday. So Saddam Hussein, for the first time in the history of this mankind, tried to sell his oil in euro as the currency. For the first time. Imagine what would happen when America for so many years had been just possessing this thing as a prized possession, and one person really raises his head and does something like this. The entire military of America was directed at one man. There is no reason that there was oil. There were oil wells, or they wanted Iraq invasion for some reason, or they wanted to capture Saddam Hussein. He did a mistake. He tried to sell his oil in euro. You'll find this piece of information somewhere. You find this, you'll find it. But you'll not find the whole story anywhere. You'll have to connect it. So you know the punishment, and the entire military expenditure started. Even before that it had started. I'm just giving you the roots. You know whatever happened to him. Fine, the world became silent again. US is the superpower. So dollar as a currency, in a way, is protected by its military. It's the only currency in the world that is actually protected by its military. That anyone messes up and says, we cannot say the dollar is the international currency, the US will come and crush you the next day. In fact, in 2008, one more gentleman had this notion that, no, this should not happen. The president of Iran, he opened the third oil exchange in the world called the Iranian Oil Exchange. You know, Iran and US have been absolutely hostile for many decades. And they were friendly with Iran at one point in time. But 1979 crisis and all of the hostage crisis, they became completely hostile. The US said, if anyone is buying oil from Iran, we are not allies. In fact, India was asked specifically not to buy oil from Iran. Anyone knows this, by the way. We were specifically asked for this reason. They do not want any other currency to be the trading currency, global reserves currency or oil trading currency. So this was stopped because he started selling in Chinese currency and Russian currency, even gold. This guy, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran. The US was able to really quash that also. But today, the situation is very simple. Why does it protect the dollar? What is the fear? The point is fine, it protects the dollar, but what is the advantage? The advantage is, today if we want to import something, which currency do we need? If America as a continent wants to import something, what does it need? The dollar again. In export also it earns dollar, import it gives away dollars. So we have to earn the dollars either through FDI or through FII or some other channel. We have to earn those dollars. They can just print. We can't print dollars, right? Today, let's say euro is the currency. Euro is never going to be the currency because the entire Eurozone crisis, by the way, was sponsored by America just to make sure that dollar would not be toppled. They never wanted euro to be strong. So if you really believe Eurozone was a completely different crisis because of pensioners, and it's all hoax. It's really a hoax. Next thing, I'm just trying to give you a complete perspective, the entire story about it. It's so bad a situation right now in the US that if the dollar is not the global reserves currency, the country will go bankrupt in a single day. It's that bad a scene. It can totally go bankrupt. The only reason why it is able to salvage itself so well, and that is why so much expenditure on its military, just to protect a currency. that they know every president of the US since the 1970s, they have known very clearly the day the dollar does not remain the currency of the world, we are finished. And internally, this is the debate, how do you really keep it going? And that is why they spend so much on their military. To give you a perspective, one more, if the US were to import in its actual currency, if dollar is not the usual currency, the dollar will devalue to such an extent that it will have to maybe 20 times spend the money 20 times to buy the same gallon of oil or something in euro. But today there is no problem. They can just print. They can print as much as they want. Do you realize what kind of domination it is? It's forced domination completely. The country is almost bankrupt in one sense. It has borrowed like mad people from China. There's another thing to it. Treasury bonds that China has bought, they'll become worthless. China has how much treasury bond, by the way? What is the worth? More than that, about 2 trillion. And $1 trillion is the amount of money that you can't imagine. If since the birth of Christ, every day you had spent $1 million, that is 5 crore rupees, you can't spend $1 trillion till date. Since the birth of Christ, if you had been spending $1 million per day, like 6 crore rupees a day, every day since the birth of Christ, you would not have been able to consume $1 trillion. More than that much, China holds as paper currency. It is just paper, there is no worth of that. So if tomorrow the dollar collapses, so it's quite intermeshed, but this is the kind of analysis you would need for this answer. And no book or no school in the world will give you this analysis.